And joining us now to discuss is former Trump campaign aide Rick Gates. Rick, great to have you with us here. What do you make of these tanks, of 31 specifically, tanks from the U.S. going to Ukraine that President Biden announced today? What does that symbolize in terms of the war?
Yeah, symbolically, it's a great step for the U.S. There's been a lot of criticism of the Biden administration to step up, take action. As you recall, months ago, the Ukrainians were asking for airplanes to try to protect its airspace. That was a significant, hurdle for the Ukrainians to overcome. The U.S. nor the EU gave them planes. So this is a major step, particularly as you look at some of the tactical issues surrounding the war right there now. We haven't had a harsh winter. The energy crisis hasn't hit nearly as hard as people expected. So the delivery of the tanks could be a significant turning point for the Ukrainians as they push back the Russians. And more importantly, I think for the U.S. and the EU, what this shows is that, hey, we actually believe now that we could probably topple the Russians in Ukraine. It's a risk, but it's a risk that we're worth taking. A lot of people argue it should have been taken many months ago, but it is a significant step, and I think a step that the U.S. will have a significant position in escalating this to the point where Ukraine will have the defenses it needs. That's been the biggest protractor so far. Ukraine hasn't had the weapons it needs to repel Russia.
You know, Boris Johnson in the UK has said that he believes that Ukraine should become part of NATO. And I wanted to ask you, what is that process and why has it been so difficult?
Yeah, it's a great question, Bob. I worked in Ukraine for over 10 years, and through that time in the political landscape, there were numerous instances where Ukraine wanted to move to NATO, but there was also a hard push against it, primarily because of the trade that exists between Ukraine and Russia. Almost 40% trade exists between the two countries, and that's significant to their economic impact. So Russia was always threatening that it would turn off trade and other aspects with Ukraine, which put Ukraine in a box always between Russia and the EU. I think there's no doubt now that the majority of the Ukrainians would prefer to be aligned with NATO simply for the protective measures that NATO would offer under Article 5.
Yeah, and Rick, there are also reports coming out of Russia that describing these tanks specifically from both Germany and the U.S. as sort of crossing a red line, if you will. Are you surprised that we haven't heard specifically or directly from Putin yet? And what do you think they will do to respond?
Well, one, I think we will hear from him, and more importantly, what they're doing, and you reported on the frigate with a hypersonic missile. That's a provocation. That is posturing by Russia to show that it is going to potentially do something in the face of the announcements by the U.S. and the EU in supplying Ukraine with tanks. But I think it's posturing. I don't think the Russians are prepared to take those steps as far. And this is the first change really from the U.S. and the EU in a significant and assertive way to help the Ukrainians. So I'm actually very upbeat about what the U.S. and Germany have done in terms of supplying this. Now, remember, as Jim just reported, it's going to take weeks, months for this to really roll out in a practical fashion. But to your question earlier, it's the symbolism behind it. It's now that the U.S. and the EU are specifically saying, hey, we think Ukraine can win. We're going to help them on that way.
All right, Rick Gates, really appreciate your insight as always. Thank you.